Hello, Dr. Sushma Singh this side. Today in Unit 12, Descent and Alliance Approaches to the Study of Kinship in India, we are going to start our lecture on topic Approaches to the Study of Kinship Systems. In simple words, you can say that kinship system refers to a set of persons whom we recognize as relatives by virtue of blood or marriage relationship. I hope you will be able to identify in one category the family relationships and in the other category the marriage relationship. These are two basic social relationships we are all familiar with from closer quarters. In sociology, we use a technical term consanguinity to denote all blood relationship and affinity to denote all relationship through marriage. It should not be difficult for you to give examples of the two type of kin relationship. It would not be wrong to say that this point that it is the social recognition of these relationships that is more important than the actual biological ties. You may already know that networks built around kin relationship play a significant role in both rural and urban social life in India. Let us now look at the main approaches to the study of kinship in India. That is the ways in which sociologists have explained the systems of kin relationships found in society in India. Sociologists have described, compared, and analyzed the kinship related findings from various regions of India. We may classify these approaches to study of kinship under two headings. First, the ideological approach, and the second, the anthropological or sociological approach. Let us discuss each of two approaches. The first is ideological approach. You would agree with me if I say that social institutions of Indian society have their roots in literary and learned tradition of the country. Many sociologists have used textual sources to explain the ideological and jural basis of our institutions. You can cite the example of K.M. Kapadia, who has used classical texts to describe Hindu kinship system. Similarly, you can give another example of R.H. Prabhu, who bases his description of Hindu social organization on Sanskrit text. I would add the example of the Iravati Karve, J.S. Ghurye. Both of them have extensively worked on the Indian kinship system. Both have explained kinship pattern in different regions of India on the basis of textual sources. They have taken a socio-historical perspective to discuss the various kinship systems. In this sense, the ideological approach is to study of kinship has provided a framework to understand the elements of continuity and transformation in the system. Now let us come to the second approach, anthropological sociological approach, descent and alliance. Anthropological and sociological studies have looked at kinship systems from the point of view of the descent and alliance. Some of you may ask what is meant by the term descent and alliance. Let us now discuss the descent and alliance approaches to the study of kinship. The first is descent approach. Kin relationships give concrete shape to establish clear-cut corporate social unit. You and I, in fact, each one of us belongs to a corporating and closely bound group of people. As a member of the group, you can depend upon the help and support of such people. You would observe that such cooperating local groups are always larger than elementary families of spouses and their children. When these groups are recognized or defined on the basis of shared descent, we call them descent groups. In India, we generally find the patrilineal and matrilineal descent system, and of the two, patrilineal system is more common. The description and analysis of kin relationship in the descent group have given us a fairly comprehensive sociological understanding of certain types of kinship systems in India. In sociological studies, sociologists have used in the past such terms as line or lineal or lineage, etc., with or without the prefix patri or matri, in the following four different ways. To denote corporate descent group, that is lineage proper. To denote the chosen line of inheritance, succession, etc., in a given society. In the study of relationship terminologies, we use the expression two-line prescription to refer to the terminological structures we are consistent and bilateral cross-cousin marriages. Regardless of which lines, matriline or patriline or both, we choose for the above three purposes. Lineal relative refers to one's ascendants or descendants. Lineal relatives are those who belong to the same ancestral stock in a direct line of descent. Opposed to the linear relatives are collaterals. They belong to the same ancestral stock but not in a direct line of descent. The first three uses are context specific, that is, they refer to a particular situation. Here we emphasize social relations and groups, and sociologists study them in terms of interaction, norms and values of a particular society. For example, following the lineage and descent approaches, scholars like Radcliffe Brown have discussed the relation between mothers, brothers, and sisters in a patrilineal society. They use the idea of complementary filiation, that is, the relationship an ego has with the relatives on the mother's side in a patrilineal society. In a matrilineal society, it refers to the relationship of an ego has with the relatives on the father's side. In a patrilineal society, a person's matrilineal group is the affinal group of the person's father. This is the group from which the person's father has taken a wife. For this reason, some sociologists like to consider the question of affinity in its own right, rather than as a complementary set of relationship. You may say that in the descent approach, the emphasis is on social organization of descent groups. Consequently, there is very little focus on the affinity aspect of relationships. Let us now look at the approach. who focuses on relationship arising out of the marriage alliance. Alliance approach. Kin relationships entail also patterns and rules of marriage. When you find a sociologist paying special attention to these aspects of kinship, you can say that he or she is following the alliance approach to understand the pattern of kinship. Many studies of kinship in India have focused on marriage as an alliance between the two groups and on kinship terminology as a reflection of the nature of alliance. Because of their concentration on relationship arising out of marriage, you can safely say that these studies follow the alliance approach. The main exponent of this approach was Louis Dumont. He focused on the role played by marriage in the field of kinship in South India. Dumont focused on the opposition between the consanguines and the affines as reflected in the Dravidian kinship terminology, and made an important contribution to our understanding of kinship system in India in general and the South India in particular. Following the implications of Levi-Strauss theory, Dumont applied to South India a structural theory of kinship that brought out the repetition of intermarriage through the course of generations. This pattern highlighted the classification of kin persons into two categories of parallel and cross relatives. Alliance approach to the study of kinship has helped sociologists to discuss and explain the distinction between the bride giver and bride taker. In addition, it has also included the discussion on the notion of hypergamy, that is, the bride takers are always superior to the bride giver. Practice of dowry in the relation to hypergamy and ideas of exchange in marriage. Sociologists and anthropologists followed the descent approach to explain the kinship system in India. This they did in the context of four aspects of kinship relation. For the sake of consistency in our delineation of both the approaches, we will continue to use the same four aspects for discussing also the alliance approach in the context of kinship system in South India. You will find the four aspects briefly discussed below. The first is kinship group. Kin relationship provide both a method of passing on the status and property from one generation to the next and effective social group for purposes of cooperation and conflict. You need to identify the form of descent or of tracing one's relationship. In other words, you find out the social groups within which relatives cooperate and conflict. These social groups constitute kinship groups. Now the kinship terminology. The list of terms used by the people to refer to their kin relationship expresses the nature of kinship system. This is why by describing kinship terminology you are able to throw light on the kinship system. Most features of the kinship system of any society are usually reflected in the way kinship terms are used in that society. Generally, a person would apply the same term to those relatives who belong to the same category of kin relationship. In this case, these relatives would also occupy similar kinship roles. A comparison and analysis of the various kinship terms helps us to understand the kinship structure, its makes up, and the behavior associated with each term. You can say that kinship terms provide the context and the idiom for our social relationships. In this sense, kinship terms do not just tell us about the biological and sociological relationship. They help us to look at the whole way of social life. Only by studying the language, values, and behavior of the particular people can we fully appreciate the significance of their kinship terms. Often the same kinship term is used to denote different meanings in the different context. This is the reason why the study of kinship terms is closely associated with the study of language and culture. Here we want to close this lecture. Thanks for listening.